Okay, let's do some more emotions. So, when we're thinking about emotion and cognition, there's a couple of questions that might be able to guide our thinking. So, to what extent are emotions modular? That is to say, to what extent are they separate and distinct and processed independently? Um, are they cognitively penetrable? We had that discussion with perception about how there were certain things that you couldn't help but perceive. Is it also possible that there's certain moods you can't help but be in? Certain emotions you can't help but be in? Certain emotional responses you can't help but to have? Are they innate? Are they cognitive? And how much can we estimate our own present, past, and future emotions? How accurate are we in understanding our own emotions? There's a theory called the network theory of affect, which um, might also be known as mood congruence. It basically thinks about emotions as a network, uh, nodes. So emotions are being particular nodes here. Um, and you would think about the connections that you associate with certain emotions and certain experiences. And so as you live your life, you're you begin to associate more and more emotions with certain phenomena or certain phenomena with certain emotions. So if you see the musical Cats, for example, it might make you sad or happy or really sad. Um, and there may be something that is activated that you're aware of and stuff that's activated that you're not aware of, um, either by experiencing the musical, hearing the music, thinking about cats, or being happy, right? Like any one of these could bring about the entire rest of the network in whole or in part. And there might be lots and lots of these networks in your mind, and the entire day you move around through certain parts of activation space. So if the network theory of affect is correct, there's certain predictions that would follow from this. Mood-dependent recall, that is, if you were in a crummy mood, you might only remember crummy times. Mood-dependent learning congruity. So it might not just be that your memory is affected, but your learning. Similarly with your thinking. And in fact, the more you feel a particular mood, the more aspects of the network become salient, become visible and aware to you. So let's try to take these one by one. It turns out there's pretty good evidence that there is mood-dependent learning and recall. That when you're sad, it's easier to remember sad times. When you're happy, it's easier to remember happy times. Um, and it's, in fact, the kind of thing that you might not have needed any research to tell you. Like when you're depressed, it's really hard to think about really happy, ecstatic times. It might just be that anxiety is the, sorry. Well, I'm not going to go back and re-record any of this. It might be that certain moods are associated with certain um, behaviors. So for example, anxiety being a future-directed, possibility-directed emotion, it might make you more, just might raise your heart rate, your level of stress, your level of attention. You might be more interested in paying attention to potentially harmful scenarios and interpreting ambiguous evidence in a negative light, thinking about them as threats rather than just ambiguous evidence. There's also a similar for the twin sister of anxiety, depression, that ambiguous situations would be judged as negative, and you might, uh, well, there's evidence that people that are depressed perform more poorly in cognitive tasks, and in fact can remember past performance as worse than it actually was. This is the emotional Stroop test. I'll do it in class, but you can do it here yourself if you want. Try to label each of the colors of each of these emotions. The idea is supposed to be that things that match your emotion are more, you're going to be quicker at being able to label the colors. This might not be the best version of this test, because some of these colors are a little bit ambivalent, or they're in the gray zone, but you get the idea, right? I could give you a list of like 5 colors or 10 colors, and you could identify each word based on the color, and it would turn out that on these neutral words, there wouldn't be any noticeable difference in terms of how quickly you can recite the color. But on the words that match your emotional state, you might perform a little bit better. Okay, so we're talking about cognition, we're talking about emotion. And one thing to realize is that this is not a single direction relationship. There are cognitive states that can cause emotions, and there are emotional states that can cause cognition. And you can actually get yourself into one or the other by changing your behavior as well. The advice that your mom gives you that you ignore about, like, when you're feeling stressed, go for a walk, that's actually good advice. Just change your behavior and you'll change the pattern. The first time I taught this class, I had a joke that it was a running joke in the class that I was a robot, and all of the examples here were about me being a robot. And the student that was pushing that joke, that was the one day that they didn't show up to class. So anyway, this slide always amuses me. It turns out that you can affect your mood by changing your behavior. If you make a sad face, you can make yourself sadder. This is the facial feedback hypothesis. Smiling can literally make you happier. And the fear, that's the example from the rickety bridge, where you can actually change the interpretation of an emotional state by giving the participant another reason for why they would be in that state. So your body is, according to this view, you're constantly interpreting what you do and trying to make sense of what you feel. And so you can actually start short-circuiting some of your emotions by changing your cognition or by changing your behavior. Right? This is dialectical behavioral therapy and other related therapies rely on this sort of feedback hypothesis. So if cognition can influence your mood and your behavior, your emotions, then it seems like there's a sense in which your emotions are cognitively penetrable. And in fact, you can actually think about that sometimes. You can talk yourself into a mood. You can laugh yourself into laughing. You can cry yourself into crying. And that's a thing that sometimes happens. And yet, there's also situations where emotions are just really hard to control. They get out of hand. And that suggests that maybe they're not fully cognitively penetrable. Maybe it's a, it's like riding a leopard. Um, you might be able to get it to go in a direction that you want sometimes, but when it wants to go somewhere, it'll take you whether you want to go there or not. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about effective forecasting. How good are we at understanding our own emotions and predicting them and recalling them? So suppose you get into a car accident or you win the lottery. About a year later, yeah, like, I don't want to actually make you be in a car accident or win the lottery. Like, you have two siblings, one of them wins the lottery, the other one gets into a car accident. Which one's happier after the year? Um, the obvious answer, and you would probably have answered this as obvious had it not been posed in this particular situation, would be that the lottery winner is happier. Um, as a matter of fact, it turns out that there's not really um, after a full year, there's not really a big change in how happy people are. Um, there are events that can make you happier. There are events that can make you sadder, and they can last a while. But eventually, we all go back to our baseline state. And that's great if your baseline state happens to be a positive state. But it can be pretty depressing a thought to think if your baseline is a depressive baseline. Um, it's called the hedonic treadmill. Your baseline state might roughly be where you are most of your life. You can affect it with like meditation and other therapies, but largely, one of the things that this shows is how bad we are at thinking about the things that make us happy and sad. As a matter of fact, like the most of the things that make you happy and sad, according to research, is connections. Money and use of your limbs might not actually matter as much. But think about other things. Can you predict how food is going to taste, right? So some of you have gone, in fact, all of you have probably gone shopping while you're hungry, and you always get way worse food for yourself, way more snacks. There is something about going shopping that makes you make different choices depending on how hungry you are. But there's some studies, the future menu studies, where I ask you, okay, you're going to go to a restaurant every week for a year, plot out what food you're going to choose. Participants will always end up picking more diverse foods if you give them that task than they actually do when they show up to the restaurant. It turns out that when you're looking at a list of things, you think, oh, well, I like a little bit of diversity in my meals. But when you show up, it's been a lot longer since you've had that meal that you go back to your baseline of just wanting to choose your favorite again and again and again. Could you accurately recall past emotions? So, yeah, people start writing things down in a diary and then ask them how happy their lives were at various points. And it turns out that we're actually really bad at even remembering how happy we were. We're bad at remembering our own emotions. And we're bad at predicting the future, right? Like the lottery versus paralysis is the case that I gave, but those of you that are over 21, I am sure, might at some point experience the thought, I will never drink again. And then lo and behold, you are a dirty, rotten liar. It turns out that a lot of the things that make us happy just don't. We think that happiness, that money will make us happy. As a matter of fact, some of the happiest countries in the world are not rich countries. The happiest regions in the country are not rich regions. Um, there is a, a benchmark, a threshold where a single dollar, let's say it's $60,000 a year. People that make $20,000 a year are sadder than people that make 30. People that make 40 are happier than people that make 30, all the way up until 60. But then the difference between somebody that makes $60,000 a year and somebody that makes $1 billion a year, there's actually no decrease in happiness or increase in happiness. And that's because once your basic needs are met, once you've got to the point where you're no longer stressing about money, you stress about other things. And it ends up being that there's just no correlation if you're not actively starving. There is pretty high correlation between amount of friends and social networks and closeness to family and happiness. But money can't buy you love, as they say. So, okay. All right, we talked about a lot of things in this lecture. We talked about what emotions are, their evolution, their psychology. We talked about the network theory of affect, and then some of the relationships between emotion and cognition, how penetrable it is or not, how much of an effect the various events could have on your emotions or emotions have on your cognition. And then we talked about how bad we are at predicting and retrodicting, recalling our own emotions. So that was emotions. Cheers.